G'day guys, I've just returned from Geelong Heresy where I ran a list containing 3 Lord of Skulls and I went undefeated for the weekend. So today I want to share the results of those games, some information about the list and some information about the event with some highlights on some specific learnings from those games that you can apply to your games of Warhammer 40k when playing with the World Eaters or any faction, because a lot of these insights are quite generalizable. So with that being said, we're going to jump straight into the video, but before we do, if you want to see another video where I really deep dive the World Eaters and talk about the specifics of this list and why each unit is in it, make sure you check out my previous video on the subject that came out a few days ago. I'll put a link to the description, and in that video, I go through the list in great detail and great detail about the event. Today's video, I'm going to summarize those two things and then go into great detail about the games themselves. So I hope you enjoy it, and yeah, let's get stuck straight into the video.
Long for the Blood God.
G'day guys, I'm currently driving back from Geelong Heresy where I went undefeated with the World Eaters, running a really interesting triple Lord of Skulls list. So you've already seen the video where I talk about the list in detail, but what I want to do is break down the list in a bit of a summary. But if you want more information on why the units are in there, what the strategy was, that sort of stuff, make sure you check out the previous video, which is titled, I think it's called 3 Lord of Skulls, 1 List, or something like that. I went through a lot of detail in there, but basically what I'm going to do now is talk about the 4 games that we played, talk about the event in a bit of a summary as well, and then basically talk about the various things that happened throughout the games that resulted in me going undefeated with the Lords of Skulls, and yeah, talk about a bit more of the sort of the meta and all that sort of stuff. So. First, I'll give you a brief recap of what my list was. Actually, first I'll start with what the event was, because that entails what the list was. So it's a 3,000 point event, so it slightly differs from the norm. Instead of you're playing your standard 2,000 point list, we're all playing 3,000 Onslaught, but still using the Leviathan mission pack, using your standard mission objectives. Like, it's a relatively standard other than that. And the other thing that they changed was it's a rule of 4 instead of rule of 3. So if you did have 4 things you wanted to take, you could. And because of the increased size of the armies, we were playing on the old 6x4 boards instead of your newer 44-inch by whatever it is, 60-inch tables. So bigger tables. And we also had longer rounds, so there was only 2 games per day. So we had 2 games day 1 and then 2 games on day 2, so a total of 4 games played. And given the additional points that we had at our disposal, and also the event does put a bit of an emphasis on it being an opportunity for people to bring big models that they otherwise wouldn't be able to fit in their lists because you don't have enough points. I decided to go with 3 Khorne Lord of Skulls and 2 Rhinos, each with 10 Berserkers inside, Master of Executions in each, one with Berserker's Glaive, one with the Favourite of Khorne. Then we had Angron, we had Khan the Betrayer just running around as a solo character, no unit attached to him. And then we had 2 units of Exalted 8-bound and 2 Rhinos. So that was the list in its totality. Really fun list to play. You would have seen that I've done some content on the Lord of Skulls in the past because I think they're a severely underrated unit. They're really good. I recently took them to a RatCon event where I placed quite high running the Lords of Skulls with 2 in the list, and that was at a 2,000 point regular GT. So I figured for this 3,000 point, if you can run 2 in 2,000 points, I see no reason not to run 3 in 3,000 points. So that was the list that I took, and like I said, make sure you check out the previous installment in this series where I basically went through every unit that's in that pros and cons, how to wield the units, why they're there, that sort of stuff in great detail. Now let's talk about the 4 games. So as I said at the start, I went undefeated. I played against 2 guard lists, but both were very, very different lists. Then I played against a Dark Angels list and finished out on the top table against a Necron list. So the first opponent was a guard player. I don't have the scores on me, obviously, because I'm driving, so I'll overlay those, or I'll put them in the comments or whatever. But the first person was a guard player. Now, he actually challenged me to a grudge match. And basically, I don't know whether every tournament does this, most tournaments don't, but basically if you issue a grudge match, you'll automatically get paired into that player round 1. So he challenged me, I accepted the grudge match, and we got paired on that first round. And he had a really interesting army. He also ended up winning Best Presented, a fucking beautiful guard army where he had 3 units of Rough Riders and then 3 of the Death Corps of Krieg Death Riders, I think they're called. So he had 30 horses of one type, 30 of another, so he had a total of 60 horseback guardsmen. And then he had, I think he had around 50 or 60 foot-slogging guardsmen as well, so it was a bit of a guard horde style of list. And then he had a whole ton of sentinels and a bunch of Taurochs, the ones with the guns, the transports with the guns. And so, yeah, really, really cool list, absolutely beautiful. And yeah, so got paired into him round 1. Interestingly, so we had it was hammer and anvil deployment, I think it was. So I basically just frontlined everything because I knew that in order for me to win, I was going to need to start applying pressure to take out those hunter-killer missiles because he had so many sentinels, and the Taurochs have them as well. So I was like, I need to take out all these hunter-killer missiles because once they're gone, he doesn't have anything over strength 12. He's going to really struggle to kill the Lord of Skulls. And when I have 3 Lord of Skulls, if I can make it so that it's hard for him to kill them, then they're going to spend the entire game just racking things up. He started with almost all of his horses in strategic reserves because he had a Leontis in his list, which gave him the ability to redeploy 3 of them into strategic reserves. So he started with 3 off and then redeployed 3 off. So he had almost all of his horses off the table in the first turn. So I won the roll off to get the first turn and basically just pushed up, killed a bunch of his sentinels, and held the middle of the board. And then in his turn 1, he pushed forward but wasn't able to actually kill any of the Lord of Skulls because I'd taken out a lot of his range damage, and I was also able to position myself so that he couldn't focus fire all of his remaining damage into a single Lord of Skulls. He basically, with the stuff that was over here, he could only see that one. With the stuff that was over here, he could only see that one. And as a result, he had to distribute his damage, which meant all 3 Lord of Skulls lived. And then we went into my next turn, and I pushed up and killed the remaining sentinels. I killed one of his Rough Rider squads. I killed a bunch of his Taurochs, and basically now I was all the way in his deployment zone with Lords of Skulls, with Angron, and I was getting stuck into the Guardsman squads. Then basically in his turn 2, he brought on all of the horses, as many as he could fit, and because the tables were bigger and we were playing hammer and anvil style deployment, there was actually a large area of the board that he couldn't put his horses because he couldn't come into my deployment zone. And because I had the Lord of Skulls sort of going down the flank, he couldn't come on from that edge. So he had to come on in his own deployment zone, which was perfect for me. And then he proceeded to fail all of his 9-inch charges, which meant all of these horses have come on and then just done nothing. I think this is the turn where he killed Angron, but then I basically, he comes on, he killed Angron, failed to get any of the charges to the Lord of Skulls, and then we took over into my turn. I blapped and killed a bunch of the horses, finished off the remaining vehicles, and then resurrected Angron. So it was like turn 3 now, and he had achieved almost nothing. So that was a massive win for me. The misplay that I think he had here was that he had everything in strat reserves, which meant he was relying on 9-inch charges. If he had deployed them all on the table, I would have not shot at the horses because I would have had to shoot the tanks because they were the ones that threatened the Lord of Skulls. So I would have shot all of his tanks, and then he would have been able to get reliable charges. So the lesson to learn from that one is, if you're running Lord of Skulls, targeting the damage that can actually threaten the Lord of Skulls is very effective and relatively easy. And then if you're versing the Lord of Skulls, don't put your whole army in strategic reserves, because you're going to need to be able to get that damage from early as possible. And he could have prevented me from charging the horses by wrapping guardsmen around them, so things like Angron not being able to go in and kill them, stuff like that. He could have done a few different bits and pieces, but unfortunately he didn't think to, and the game was relatively one-sided. So that was my first game. It was a great way to start the tournament. And then we go into the second game, which was against another Guard player. So interestingly, I haven't played against Guard in 10th edition until this event, and the first one was a home run. The second one was a very different list, however. So he had a Baneblade, he had a Shadow Sword, he had a Dawn, he had a Macarius, he had a couple other Forge World tanks. It was a really mech-heavy list. He still had Leontis, he had a few units of Scions, he had some artillery pieces, he had a Medusa, he had a few Leman Russ. So a real tank-heavy list. And this list actually terrified me, because I was like, well, he has that Shadow Sword has the capacity to just one-shot a Lord of Skulls. And it's got really long range, so it's going to be very hard for me to deal with that before it deals with me. So basically, the terrain was quite sparing on this table. We basically had one big semicircle shaped line of sight blocking ruin in each deployment zone, but outside of that, there was next to no terrain. So basically, I had to put, in order to win this game, I needed to put one Lord of Skulls in strategic reserves. And that did two things. One, it allowed me to fit the rest of my army behind that L-shaped ruin, that big semicircle shaped ruin, which meant that he wasn't able to do any damage to me turn one. And it also meant that that Lord of Skulls was going to be able to come on from strategic reserves and shoot something before it got blown up itself. And then if it got lucky and made the charge, that's obviously a fantastic as well. So I deployed super conservatively, 8-bound in strategic reserves, Lord of Skulls in 8-bound in deep strike reserves, Lord of Skulls strategic reserves, Khan in the Rhino with the Berserkers and the Master of Executions, and I basically hit everything turn one, and then he did the same thing. So he basically hit all of his stuff so that I wasn't going to be able to turn one charge with Angron. I wasn't going to be able to, if I got first turn, I wasn't going to be able to pop out and shoot anything. So it was a real cagey, really conservative deployment. And then I was like, I pray that I get second turn, because if I get first turn, I'm going to do no damage to him. But if he gets first turn, he's going to have to come out, and then when he comes out, he just does no damage to me. So we rolled off, and I got the first turn, which was really unfortunate, because it basically meant that I was going to do nothing in my first turn. So I actually made the bold move of deciding to actually just not move in my first turn. I sent a Rhino out onto an objective, because I knew that if he blew up the Rhino, he wasn't going to be able to also blow up all of the Berserkers, and that meant I would hold that objective in my command phase, so that was worth jumping out to get some primary. But I kept Angron and I kept the Lord of Skulls all hidden behind that central ruin, because I knew that the way to win this game was I had to bait him to try to come out, or I had to threat overload. So that was my first turn, sent the Rhino out. He then proceeded to shoot a bunch of stuff at the Rhino but failed to kill it, because he was still playing that conservative game. He didn't want to come out and expose himself to the Lord of Skulls unnecessarily, so he basically brought out a little bit of stuff but kept most of his stuff hidden. And then we went into my second turn, and this turn was absolutely monstrous. This won me the game this turn. And basically what happened is that Rhino, because it stayed alive, I was able to launch the Berserkers out from that Rhino, and I used the Auto 6 Advance and the Advance and Charge from the Blessings to launch that from where it was on that sort of midfield objective, and I actually charged his home objective, and I killed Leontis, I killed a tank commander, which took away his ability to issue orders, which was absolutely critical, and it also got me capture enemy outpost on my cards, which was good. And then simultaneously, whilst I was doing that, the Lord of Skulls came out. The first one came out and killed the little stuff that he brought out in order to try to kill the Rhino. The second one went around the other flank Angron followed that second one, and then the Lord of Skulls came in from strat reserves. And then this turn, what I did is I used Angron's +1 charge aura, which meant that one that came in from strat reserves was looking for an 8-inch charge. Those two basically shot and killed a tank commander, I think that they killed. And then the one that came on from strat reserves did an 8-inch charge, which I successfully got, and that allowed me to kill his assassin. He had a Calidus assassin, or a Calexis, I don't know, the one that jumps up and down. So jumped on, killed that off of an objective, which meant that he got 0 primary, because basically I killed him off that one. Nobody was on the middle. My Rhino was still on this one over here, and my Berserkers had gone and taken his home. So he got a 0-point primary, and then he had this big unit of Berserkers in his home that he had to deal with. And because I had the ability to Blood Surge move, he had to deal with them in a single volley. And all 3 Lord of Skulls were now in positions where next turn they were going to be threatening things. So we took over in his turn 2, and he came out, he shot the Baneblade, everything it had into the Berserkers, and he actually only killed 7 of them. He rolled atrociously, and as a result I got to Blood Surge move into his field artillery and killed those. And then with the Lord of Skulls, he basically brought out the Shadow Sword, and he popped one of the Lord of Skulls, just single fucking volley, just went boom, and killed the Lord of Skulls. But there was the one that was on the objective that killed the Calidus, and I basically used the CP to sticky that objective. So now I'm still on all the objectives. And that was more or less all that he did. And then we went into my turn 3, and Angron went and killed the Shadow Sword. The Lord of Skulls went and finished off a bunch of tanks. The artillery was now dead, and he was basically boxed into his corner with pretty much just the Baneblade left alive. And then he had a big unit of Rough Riders as well. Sorry, I forgot to mention that earlier. He brought that on, they went and charged and killed Angron. But because the Lord of Skulls had killed so many things, I basically then spent the CP to make a Blessings roll and automatically brought back Angron. So he went to all the effort of killing Angron, didn't even get him what he wanted, and the game was pretty much a blowout from there, and I got another big win. So that one, the lessons learned there were that he probably should have strat reserved one of his big tanks, knowing that neither of us were going to do anything to each other on the first turn. Means that there's not that much value having it on the board first turn, whereas being able to bring it on wherever you want it on the second turn, get angles, and shoot the things you want to shoot would have been really good. Obviously he needed to have one of his big tanks on the table to threaten me so that I don't just go aggro on the first turn and push out. So what I would have done if I was him is I would have had the Shadow Sword on the table, and I would have brought the Baneblade on from strategic reserves, because it's got a bunch of demolishers and las cannons and all that sort of stuff. It probably would have put down one of the Lord of Skulls, or close enough to. And if he could sequence it so that on the turn that he pops out, he kills 2 Lord of Skulls, well, now I'm in a lot of trouble, and it's going to be very hard for me. So that was the lessons he could have learned and could have potentially done a little better with. And the lessons for me was that the Berserkers launching out of those Rhinos are so fast that being able to stage that Rhino on one of the midfield objectives kind of means you can threaten the whole board relatively easily. And being able to get all those OC2 bodies on your opponent's home is a massive swing in the game. So yeah, that's how that game went down. And then we went out for dinner as a community. Pretty much the whole tournament goes out for dinner and drinks, and we went to a pool hall where I played a bunch of billiards and got absolutely wrecked. I'm very not good at that. But it was a ton of fun. We had a bunch of drinks, shots, cocktails. It was pretty wild. And then we went back to the Airbnb, and I slept on the couch and woke up with a crook neck and bad back, and I'm like, oh yeah, today's going to be fun. So day 2, went into a Dark Angels player in the first round. Now this list actually terrified me. So he had the Lion, which is actually really good into World Eaters because the Lion has always fights first, so you can't really charge him. And pretty much anything that he charges, he's going to mince. So I'm like, the Lion's a big problem. Then he also had a big unit of 10 Deathwing Knights with a couple of characters attached to it in a Spartan. And I was like, okay, the Spartan's a problem because it's got all those, the laser destroyers, which are strength 14, so they're wounding the Lord of Skulls pretty effectively, so that's annoying. And those Deathwing Knights are actually really, really hard to get through, because if Angron hits them, they got 4 up invulnerable saves, so Angron's not particularly effective because he's only at 9 attacks, so he kills like maybe 3 or 4. The Berserkers aren't particularly effective because they can Armor of Contempt, and I'm only AP 1, which means that he's going to be getting 2 up saves against all of my damage, so that's not effective. Like, there's just not much in my army that can effectively deal with that unit. So I was like, the Deathwing Knights are a problem, the Spartan's a problem, the Lion's a problem, and then he also had a unit of Devastator Centurions with Grav Cannons, which are anti-vehicle 2+. So I'm like, well, they're a problem as well. They'll be very effective at killing Lord of Skulls. They'll be very effective at putting down my units. So I'm like, this is going to be a really hard game. His list is fantastic. The other units that he had were he had a unit of 6 aggressors with the all the meta stuff, the captain, Gravis Captain, the bio fucking whatever he's called, apothecary. He had a few units of intercessors. He had Azrael. He had another character. He had a unit of Blade Guard. He had the Dark Talon, the whatever it is, the Raven Wing boat that has the aura of stealth and cover. He had a Ballistaris Dreadnought. He had a ton of stuff, and I was like, yeah, this game is going to be really, really tricky. We also, for this game, it was Dawn of War deployment, which is something you don't see in tournaments very often. And yeah, so once again, I had to put one of the Lord of Skulls in strategic reserves because I knew that if I had to deploy them all, I wasn't going to be able to hide them all, and they were just going to get nuked on the first turn. I also put the 8-bound in strategic reserves again, and basically I deployed everything as hidden as I possibly could. I also measured out, he made a critical error in his deployment where he put the Devastator Centurions on the table. He didn't put them in strat reserves, and what this meant was he basically deployed them out of line of sight, and basically I just measured, they got a 4-inch move, 24-inch range gun, so 28 inches. He could advance and shoot for a CP, so I just made sure I was like 30-odd inches away from them with the Lord of Skulls, and that meant that he was just sitting in his ruin and he couldn't do anything, because if he came out, he wasn't going to shoot me, and then I was going to turn all of my guns from my Lord of Skulls on that unit and probably send Angron in and charge it and just nuke it. And now he doesn't have the capacity, he doesn't have an easy answer to the Lord of Skulls. So if he had put it in strat reserves, it would have been a big problem, but he didn't. He also had a drop pod with Infernus Marines, the Flamer guys, the new ones. I forgot about those. But yeah, so basically I deployed everything out of his range, all line of sight. He basically, in his first turn, he put the drop pod, he got first, he put the drop pod down on an objective, and then I sent Berserkers in to fight it and kill it. So I killed all of the Infernus Marines that came out of that drop pod in my first turn. Then in his second turn, he basically sent the Terminators into those Berserkers, forgetting that I had fights first. So I did explain it to him at the start, but he clearly forgot. So he sent them in, and at this stage he didn't have the CP for Armor of Contempt because he spent it on, I think he spent it on neg1 damage. And as a result, those Berserkers actually put in some pretty heavy work. I heroically intervened with Angron, and basically between the Berserkers and Angron, I almost wiped out the unit. I got him down to like, I think 3 left or 2 left, and that's with my Master of Executions sniping out both of the characters that were in the unit. So that was really effective, and it meant that I basically neutered the Terminators, which were one of my big threats. I'd nullified the Centurions by just staying outside of their range, which meant that he really only had one more threat that was of massive concern to me, which was the Lion, and he basically moved the Lion into the center of the table. So again, knowing that the Lion had an 8-inch move, I just went, cool, I'm going to stay further than 20 inches away from you. which means the lion's not charging me. And I'd basically just kited him. I basically stayed away from him. Then the game pretty much proceeded as you would imagine from there, where the Lord of Skulls were shooting some stuff. Basically, he realized that if the game continued at the status quo, he wasn't going to be able to do much, because Angron was now in a position where he could go get the Centurions, because they sort of came around the side. So he brought the Centurions out, even though he didn't have range on the Lord of Skulls. He brought them out, advanced them up in the middle of the board, and then in his turn, I rapid ingressed the Exalted 8-bound, which is one of my favorite things to do. Rapid ingress was like made for Exalted 8-bound. They're so good at it because they can drop anywhere. They don't have to be tethered to a board edge. And then from that position 9 inches away from your opponent, they move 9, and they can more often than not advance and charge. So they were really effective at just dropping in and doing the damage. And so I rapid ingressed them. Then in his turn, he basically didn't do a massive amount. We went into my turn, and I moved the Exalted 8-bound out so that they were right next to his Centurions. And I asked him, do you want to Overwatch? And he said no, he's going to save the Overwatch for the Lord of Skulls. And then basically what I did is I then proceeded to move the first Lord of Skulls so that only one of his Centurions was within range of it. And I was like, cool, do you want to Overwatch? And he's like, oh, no, because then only one of them is going to get to shoot. And then basically I shot just the long-range gun from the Lord of Skulls, Skull Hurler, and I think I killed like 2 of them. So he pulled 2 from the back, and then I moved the next one out and did the same thing, made it so that only one of them was within range, which meant that he could only Overwatch with one guy, so he didn't bother. Shot it, killed another one. And then basically now when I went to charge with the Exalted 8-bound, he was like, well, now it's not worth the CP for an Overwatch because he's only got half the squad left. And then the Exalted 8-bound went in and chopped that squad to pieces. So now I've dealt with the Centurions, dealt with the Terminators, and the Lion is outside of any charge range, so he's not able to do anything. And then at this stage, it looked like the game was definitely in the bag. I had the win. So I started relaxing a little bit, and I was like, oh, cool, I'm going to just charge I'm going to put Angron within the Lion's charge range, and that's fine. I'll let you charge me. I'll let you have Angron. I started making some plays to sort of bring him back into the game. It was really interesting with the Lion and Angron. So basically, knowing that the Lion was going to charge me in the next turn, I used my Blessings of Khorne to get Fight on Death 4+ on Angron, thinking that he's just gonna charge me, he was gonna kill Angron, and then Angron was gonna kill him back. He charged Angron and actually failed to kill Angron. So he went in, tons of attacks, devastating wounds, all kinds of really crazy stuff. But I did have the 4-up invulnerable save and the 6-up feel no pain, and I also spent 2 CP at this stage to put neg 1 damage, which meant that his 4 damage weapon went down to 3, which means he was going to need a lot of wounds to get through to kill me. Angron was weakened. He'd been taken las cannons to the face, so he was weakened, but obviously not weakened enough. The Lion went in, failed to kill Angron, and then on the swing back, Angron killed the Lion. The Lion got Angron down to a single wound left, and then when Angron fought and killed the Lion has an ability where every 6 to save reflects a mortal wound back onto the target. So he actually reflected the mortal wounds and killed that last wound off of Angron. So basically he charged me and we both died, which was pretty cool. I expected that to happen, but I didn't expect it to happen that way. I thought he was going to charge me and kill me, but then I was going to roll 4-up, Fight on Death, and kill him. But it turned out he charged me and failed to kill me. I then fought normally, killed him, which then caused him to reflect mortal wounds, killing me. So it was this weird situation, but it was pretty cool. And yeah, that pretty much spelled out that game, because now he had just a bunch of like small things running around, not able to do the damage that he needed to do, because I still had I still had all 3 Lord of Skulls, and I still had both my units of Exalted 8-bound, and he had practically nothing left on the table. So another crushing win for me. And then the final game was into a really interesting Necron list. So I think this Necron player took a very similar philosophy that I did, where he took his regular sort of tournament list, but then just added some big stuff. So I took a hybrid between my sort of tournament standard list and, you know, my more fun sort of, you know, silly list. And he did the same thing, but well, it looks like he did the same thing. So I'll run through his list. So he had 2 units of 20 Necron warriors, which is one of the popular sort of meta archetype lists. He also had, which each one of them had character inside of it for a 5-up Feel No Pain. He then had, I'm not sure of the characters' names, I'm going to fuck this up because I don't know Necrons well enough, but he had the character that has a 6-inch aura that gives him +1 to his AP and reduces the AP of mine by 1. Which this was actually a really effective combo into me specifically, because it meant that those berserkers were now hitting at AP 0, which meant that his Necron warriors had a 4-up save. So he was effectively able to give the Necron warriors a 4-up invulnerable save and a 5-up Feel No Pain on both units, which is really, really powerful. But that's obviously specifically powerful into AP 1. So he had that. He also had a monolith, which was really interesting. That thing is ridiculously tough. Toughness 14 with a 2-up save. And it also has this really cool ability where basically he can pick up a unit and teleport it back to the monolith and then shoot with them. So basically I wasn't going to be able to keep this guy locked in combat. He was going to be teleporting all over the place. He was going to be teleporting units from that were in threat range to safety. So that was going to be really interesting. He also had a couple of scarabs. He had a reanimator. He had some big spiders. He had some death marks. And then the main thing that he had in his list that I think is the off-meta pick was the big Necron construct. I have no idea what it's called. Don't ask me what it's called. But the big Necron construct, which is quite scary to face. It had, I think it had D6 plus 6 damage on its guns, and it had a ton of shots. And it was like strength 24 or something ridiculous. So I was like, okay, that thing's a problem. That thing's going to kill Lord of Skulls. And then the monolith itself has a bunch of anti-tank shots as well that would be very effective in Lord of Skulls. So basically, this game played out similar-ish to the guard matchup where for tanks, where basically what I did is I was going, okay, cool, I'm going to put one Lord of Skulls in strategic reserve so that I can hide the other ones behind my ruin at my home, so he's not going to just nuke me off the table, and then I'm going to have to go for that same threat saturation. It's worth noting that I've taken tactical objectives in every game, and so far every game I've scored a perfect 100, so I'm in a pretty good position in the tournament. And then basically this game I took tactical again, and my first draw was rubbish. I basically got, once again I had to take the first turn, which I really didn't want to, because it meant that just like the guard matchup, he had everything hidden. I wasn't able to do any damage to him, which meant if I came out I was just going to die. So similar to the guard matchup, I basically sent both my rhinos out this time so that they were remaining out of line of sight. There was a couple of small ruins in the mid board, so I basically moved one out, and then I spent a CP to auto advance the other one 6 to move it out and hide. And I basically used the +2 move and the 6-up Feel No Pain to make sure that I was out in the open. So that I wasn't out in the open, I basically used that to get the movement that was required to get behind those ruins. So I moved them out onto the ruins and kept everything else hidden in my home. Then in his turn he moved out, wasn't able to kill the rhinos, wasn't able to do the damage he needed to do. And then we ticked over into my next turn, and because I still had those 2 rhinos, I basically he made a bit of a mistake here where the guy that gives him the extra AP and reduce AP was off to one side with 1 unit of warriors, and then the other warriors were on the other side of the board. And as a result, one of them was much squishier than the other. So basically I sent Angron out. Angron got a lucky 10-inch charge, or I think I needed to roll an 8 because I used his +1 to charge aura. So he went out and got the monolith. Berserkers from the rhino on this side went and hit that well-protected unit of warriors, and then the other berserkers hit the other less protected unit of warriors. And then basically I spent the CP to get +1 to wound versus characters, because there was a character in the unit, fought with those berserkers and minced that unit. Then Angron fought, blew up the monolith, and then the other unit fought, and I actually got quite lucky here with my rolls and managed to kill that other unit of 20 warriors. And this was facilitated largely through the use of stratagems, and also because I knew that I needed to spike that damage high. I knew that on average dice I probably don't do it, so I need that extra kick. I took the sustained hits from the blessings, so that I was able to get that additional damage. So that was the play this turn, and that was quite effective. So I killed both units of warriors without him having an opportunity to reanimate, which was massive. And I also killed the monolith, which meant he wasn't able to teleport things around the table, and he wasn't able to effectively deal with the Lord of Skulls because he'd lost that. He did have the Silent King, I forgot to mention, and he also had a unit of 10 Immortals. And I think his plan was to teleport the Immortals around because they have like abilities to get really good sustained hits and put out a lot of damage. But yeah, so basically now he moved out the Silent King, he moved out his heavy destroyers, the ones with the single shot that's really good anti-tank, he moved them out, and he moved the big fucking construct out, and he did some pretty heavy damage. He killed one of the Lord of Skulls and Angron that turn. But then in the next turn, those berserkers finished up the Immortals, the 2 Lord of Skulls went out and killed the heavy destroyers, and I resurrected Angron. At this stage, he'd pushed forward enough that I could deep strike Angron behind him, and then my plan was that Angron was going to charge the big construct, but I managed to actually kill the big construct with the Lord of Skulls D6 plus 2 damage weapon. I think it's the Gore Storm Cannon, I think it's called. And they basically, I rolled really hot on those, rolling lots of 6s on the damage, so that was able to kill that thing. Which then meant Angron was free to charge the spiders and the reanimator that were on his home objective, and at this stage it was more or less a tabling. And once again, that was facilitated by the resurrection of Angron, and the resurrection of Angron was facilitated by the fact that the Lord of Skulls were killing things, which allowed me to modify those dice on the Blessings of Cornroll. So yeah, that more or less sums up the game. So it was a really sick event, and as a result I got first place, which I've got a nice little golden hammer here, which is the trophy for this event. And Geelong Heresy is an event that I go to every year. It's one of my highlights because it's a little bit more casual, it's a little bit more laid back. You get an opportunity to bring big models, you get an opportunity to drink beers and have some fun. So yeah, if you're from Melbourne or you're in the area, I highly recommend checking it out. And if you're a World Eaters player, I highly recommend looking into these Lord of Skulls because they are brutal. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this sort of recap on the event. I won't bang on too much about it after this because I've pretty much covered off everything there. But if you do have any questions and you want to know a little bit more about any of the games or any of the lists, I'll try and track down copies of the lists that I versed so I can paste them in the comments. But if you want to know more, chuck a comment below and we'll get a conversation started because there's always lots of things to talk about post-event, and I love having the chat with you guys in the comment section below. And if you would like to join our exclusive Discord server where we talk tactics and strategies, you can do so by joining our Patreon. There's multiple tiers in there, and depending on the tier, depends on what level of Discord access you get, but there's one of them where we talk probably 2 to 3 times a week, phone calls, that sort of stuff. And then the other ones are more sort of hobby chats, and we have list discussions and stuff, but it's all text-based. So if you want to do the phone call one, check out that tier. If you want to do just text-based lists, conversations like that, ask me any question you want anytime, then that's a great place to do that. And if you want to show your support for the channel so I can keep producing content like this, head over to blogforthebloodgod.com. I've got a bunch of merchandise like the shirt I'm wearing now. There's dice, there's objective markers, there's gaming mats, there's terrain, there's a whole ton of stuff. The links for all of this stuff is also in the description, but if you want to head over to the website, that's a great place where you can find out more information about how you can support this channel. So with that being said, I'm going to love you and leave you, and yeah, thanks for tuning in. I'll talk to you in the next one. Cheers. Log for the Blood God.
The Warhammer community suffers from some of the most prohibitively expensive essentials in the world, especially Australian content creators. Every single day, Dean wants to create content, but he can't. Suffering from old, worn-out brushes, expensive model kits, and costly software and equipment he can't endure much longer. Just look at this dirty paint water. Would you drink this? Would you let your child? Even a small monthly donation can help provide Dean with clean paint water, basic tools for survival, and access to life-saving information and education. So please, follow the links in the description below and find out how you can sponsor a mad cunt like Dean today and end the suffering. Suffering that is cruel, unsustainable, and your fault.